Hi, everybody. I would like to welcome you to today's presentation. Few housekeeping rules. We won't be able to hear or see you, so if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to tap them into the chat or Q&A. We're going to allow Grant, our speaker today, to get through his slides, and then we'll be answering questions. So go ahead and post them. Go ahead and post them in either place, and we'll do that. And with that, oh, everybody's still dropping in. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Grant and get us started.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I'll give a little background as people still filter in on how we got to here, my background. So my career started in herbs and spices. My running joke, and the only one I have, is I dropped spices and kept herbs and entered the cannabis industry in 2015. And I've been in it for the last 6 years as working for various companies, all of which became market leaders. So I've worked in Maryland, I've worked in Massachusetts and Florida. And when I worked in Florida, I ran the second largest manufacturer there, growing from 3 million to 15 million a month in sales. And I was making over $250,000 pre-roll joints a month. And as a result, myself, Mike Borum, and Allman pulled together and said, we think there's a real opportunity here to automate as a service. So with that, we decided to start Accelerant Manufacturing. And what we really do is scalable automation, which I'll show you here in just a second. So I'm going to share my screen, go through my presentation, and then happy to answer any questions you may have. So with that, we will get started. So welcome. I just introduced myself. My name is Grant Schuster. My partner, Mike Borum, is on here with me as well. Thank you again, Wendy. So there's four really great things I think about our opportunity in front of us. One, we're an ancillary cannabis opportunity, somewhere between ag tech, equipment manufacturing, and a SaaS business model. That's a very highly attractive business model. There's a very large need for our equipment, and we go cash flow positive very, very quickly. So if you remember rolling joints for you and your college friends in college, you'd grab papers, you'd grab some plant material, you'd grind it up, throw it in and roll it up, and you do that one at a time. Well, for someone like Jim Belushi, who is a manufacturer in this industry, 75% of his payroll is attributed to the packaging and rolling of joints. So that's our problem. We have rapidly increasing demand for a very labor-intensive product. Whenever you have anything handmade, you end up with inconsistent quality measures due to the handmade nature of it. The cannabis industry has a very high cost of capital, often exceeding 15%, sometimes even 20% cost of capital. And the regulatory issues really play in our favor. Having state siloed production and very strict weight requirements really make automation necessary. So our solution is a automated modular cannabis joint rolling machinery, and we have remote monitoring and support and production reporting through a very capital efficient model that we call the PaaS, or production as a service. So we provide the equipment very similar to how Xerox provides their equipment. And instead of making copies, we make joints, but we get paid exactly the same way per joint and per copy. One major difference is that for every copy, in our case, a joint, that our customers make, they actually make revenue from. In the Xerox model, that's really just a cost center for them. So this is our machine. We're post-prototype, we're in the field. We have a modular system, and that's scalable, and we're connected to the IoT for connected production, billing, reporting, and troubleshooting. And it only requires one operator to run. So the market opportunity in cannabis in general is huge. There's an illicit conversion from black market to the legal market. And then there's existing market expansion, places like California, Oregon, and Colorado, where they're expanding, or on the East Coast with places like New York, where they go from medical to adult use. So both of those lead to what is going to be over a 20% CAGR for the next 4 years. to over $40 billion in sales by 2025. So to give everybody a little overview, it's unlikely that states are going to give up these markets to a national player because of the jobs and the tax revenue. And the most important number on this slide to me is 6. In the bottom right corner, there's only 6 markets. One of them is Alaska, which is a very small market, that have a developed market, meaning a market in operation for over 3 years. So it's hard to say that the market is mature. It is going to continue to grow at very high rates. So there's a lot of different types of products, from flower to vape, gummies, so on. But we're here to talk about joints. They make up over 10% of the market right today, and they're growing at 144% year over year, and they're only constrained by high labor contribution and difficulty to supply. From a go-to-market strategy, we have 3 principal ways of going to market. We have channel partners who are other ancillary players in the industry, like building providers. We have one in Canada to distribute to the Canadian operators. We're targeting multi-state operators because one sale becomes one easy, flexible contract for their operation. And 3 is the MJ Biz Con in October has over 30,000 visitors each year to that show, and is the show to go to for selling your cannabis goods. We do have some competitors, but we are more precise, modular, and we have a no CapEx model. So the precision allows us to have more consistent quality. We use all electric parts, and that allows us to be very highly tunable and highly flexible for our customers' machines. Our modularity, we only have to invest into a customer as much as they produce. And then our no CapEx model, as they continue to produce, we provide more and more capacity to meet their needs. We previously raised $1.75 million. About $500,000 of that was development costs taken by the founders of the company, and $1.25 million was through a PIK to fund the business. And we're currently raising $1 million through a convertible note that'll take us both to cash flow positive and to a Series A later this year. From a financial perspective, this business becomes highly attractive because on an operational basis, we have a tremendous margin that drops to the bottom line because it's very similar to AWS's business model. We invest into machines, and we look at that as investment activity, and the cash flow then from operations has a very nice margin associated with it. If we stop producing the machines, we continue to make that revenue in perpetuity. This slide is Mike's favorite slide of the whole deck. It's LTV to CAC. If you look at some of the biggest public companies in the SaaS-based business model, our lifetime value relative to our cost of acquisition falls really in the top 5 of these companies, which we believe over time will reward itself with a really nice valuation for how we for a potential exit. One major or a few major differences is we have a 4-year contract, so we're not fighting to keep churn. That 4-year contract is locked in. 2, our machinery is critical to production and critical to delivery. And 3 is, we're not chasing millions of customers. We're chasing highly concentrated operators. With that, unlike many cannabis companies that I've seen and been a part of in different areas of the country, we have a very seasoned executive team. Between everybody, we have over 33 exits at $8 billion. We've raised over $6.5 billion in capital. And then a number that's not on here is we've done over $500 million in custom automation for the likes that you see below: Procter & Gamble, HP Inc., HP Biosciences, Amazon. All have very strict requirements on how to do automation, and we've done over $500 million of that. So, where do we go after pre-rolls? Right now our principal focus is to stay focused on delivering the best pre-roll machine to the market that we can. But we do see a lot of opportunity to go vertical and then also horizontal. So within pre-rolls, there's opportunity to go into packaging and also to go backward into the making of the cones. And then moving forward past really into 2022 is the opportunity to provide cannabis manufacturing in a box. So there's opportunities in flower and vape and tincture to really create an opportunity to create a one-stop shop to go to for automation in various different product portfolios. So in summary, and then we'll open it up to questions, is the cannabis industry is growing really rapidly. The pre-roll market is outpacing the broader industry growth at 144% per year as opposed to 20. It's also a convenience item. We're a picks and shovels play. We are not subject to 280E tax implications. If you're not familiar with that, in the cannabis industry, you can only deduct what's considered cost of goods sold. We don't have that negative implication. We have a proven management team with traditional experience and cannabis experience. We have a very unique business model that compares well against SaaS companies, and we have significant growth opportunities beyond here. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and open it up to questions.
So I saw Nick asked a question, what's the use of the funds, Grant? So the use of the funds is, as Grant said earlier, really to put new machines in the field. We have to invest in the machines up front to then generate that revenue stream. And so we're raising capital to put more machines in the field and get to cash flow positive. We're barely cash flow negative, so a little bit of the funds would go to fund that cash flow, that negative burn for the next 3 months or so.
I have a question, Grant and Michael. You had said that a Xerox machine was a cost center, but these machines actually generate revenue. Can you just kind of explain that a little more?
Sure. So you know, in most businesses, making copies is just a cost, right, of doing business. You have to make copies for meetings, for copies of whatever your documentation is. In our business, as each joint is made, they actually are able to make revenue, and a lot of revenue. So the cost to make a joint on our equipment is really very comparable to making a copy, but they're able to actually charge, in some cases, $4, in some cases $2, and in very really attractive products, you can see it upwards of $5 to $10 for that product. So every time they turn it on, instead of it just being a cost for a piece of paper, they actually get to make revenue off of that.
Thanks, Grant. And then we have from Nick again, what is the cost of each machine and the cost to user per joint?
Sure. So our cost per machine, the way to think about this is there's a base frame and then there's multiple groups of modules. We call those group sets. We have to always invest a base frame. That's about $40,000. And then we have to invest for each amount of output. So we invest in $40,000 to $45,000 for each set group of modules, and we can have up to 4 groups. So on the low end, it's about $85,000, and on the high end, it's about $215,000, if I did my math right, of modules that we can have on that machine. But we regulate that relative to how much production and output they have. So by doing that, we peg the payback of each machine to about 9 months, 12 months at the longest. And then if they really outproduce that group set, it can get as low as 6 months. On the cost to user per joint, we have what we call the walk down. It pays for installation, it pays for commissioning. So it starts at 15 cents, and then it actually comes down over time to 8 cents per joint.
So Grant, I would just go add in there a couple other quick things on that. Is one, when you sign the 4-year contract, there's a minimum. So each group set is at 50,000 joints per month minimum. So the plus about our machine versus the large machines, you can only, it doesn't make sense for somebody who's producing 80,000 joints a month, okay? Because the payback, when you buy one of the large machines, you have to buy it for $450,000, $500,000. So the amount of time to get your money back out of that machine is 10 to 12 years. And so if you look at ours at 80,000, you're above the 50. We we tailor the suit to you. And then as you grow and you get more volume, and what was holding you up was your ability to produce, as you produce more, now that one machine has the ability to get you to like 150. As you grow, when you're at 120, we call you up and say, how would you like another group set? And you say, well, why would I do that? What's it going to cost me? And we say, it doesn't cost you anything. You keep paying 8 cents a joint. We'll install it. All it costs you is we're going to increase the minimum from 50 to 100, and you're already at 120. So no problem there. And two is we're going to extend your contract. So we basically push that contract extension out. When you looked at our LTV to CAC ratio, that my favorite chart, we didn't push that extension of the contract into that. So we locked it at 4 years. So if we push that extension in, we'd actually rise up in the ranks of LTV to CAC, but it's too hard to explain. So we just went with the conservative. It was good enough and it's easier to do. So that's how we think about the machines and the payback. And if you're running at 55,000 a month and we put one machine in, the first group set's the most expensive because, as Grant said, we have the frame and a group set. That is about a 10-month payback. If you're running at 80,000, that just brings the payback in. We're bringing in about, I think it's like 7 or 8 months, Grant.
So we have another question. Someone is asking, how does the joints market share look year over year as opposed to growth?
Yeah. So the industry's been growing, in the past, right, upwards of 30% year over year. And what we've seen, so from 2019 to 2020, the market grew about 20%. Maybe a little bit more, and pre-rolls in California and are actually the big 5 that are mature markets. So California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and Nevada grew about 47%. So they actually outpaced the market. And then from 2020 Q1 to 2021 Q1, it again outpaced the market 144% of pre-roll growth. The thing that we find most interesting about this is we brought up paper manufacturing or making cones as a potential vertical integration. And there's actually a backlog of cones. So we believe there's actually a constraint on the manufacturing, both from a regulatory standpoint, places like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, which are going to be new markets. Pennsylvania will likely switch to allow pre-rolls. It does not today. So you have the whole Northeast corridor. Only Massachusetts really is a current pre-roll market in a recreational sense. And
Grant, you froze.
So Michael, would you like to finish answering that? Would that be all right?
Grant's back. Grant's back.
Okay.
You froze there, Grant. So you're right at the end.
Oh, I was just saying, I think it's we believe that there's a tremendous additional growth opportunity beyond that 144%, really in the new markets. Your Northeast corridor in the paper act cone manufacturing. We think that there's more constriction today due to labor and supply than there is represented as what true demand really is.
So Grant, I would just go add, as you said, one of the big constraints is there's 2 big constraints. One, the ability to access paper, which generates your cone backlog. And 2 is the availability of labor and the scalability of that hand roll model. And so those 2 constraints have been holding back the growth. So even with those constraints, it's growing at 150% year over year. So we think if we take those constraints off in existing markets, it will go faster. And then there's the opening up of new markets. So I think those 2 go together.
So Nick followed up with, what is the term of the note and what is the pre-money valuation?
Grant, before you answer that question, I saw Nick had another question about the pricing. So the pricing, as Grant said, starts at 15 cents a joint and it walks down over your first 1 million joints. And once you hit 1 million, you're at 8 cents for the rest of the life of the machine. And so it walks down 15 cents for the first 200,000. I always mess this one up, Grant. 15 cents for the first 200,000. I think 13 cents for the next 300,000, 11 cents for the next 300,000, right? Did I get it right? And nine,
And then
five, sorry, 11 cents for the next 500,000, and then you're done.
Yeah.
So now, no.
Yeah, so we're raising a convertible note at a discount to the next round. So it's a 20% discount to the next round, and at a cap of 20 million. And the last round was a PIK preferred round of equity, or it was a PIK structure, which is Mike's favorite instrument. So I think the value of the warrant coverage, I'll let Mike explain.
The last round we did within just not participating across all the markets. We did it within just the twister. So there's a PIK note of $1,250,000 or $1,240,000 in there. It carries a 10% coupon, and then it had dollar option warrants attached to it for 9% of the company. So you get repaid on your PIK note eventually, but you also have the upside through your warrants, which is different than a convertible note. So this is an entirely different structure.
So we have a question from David. Is the machine capable of producing different size joints? Does the machine package the joints as well?
So we can produce any range of pre-rolled joints from as short as 50 or 60 millimeters all the way up to 165 millimeters. That really encompasses about 95% of the types of joints by size in the market. We can weigh anything from 0.25 all the way up to 2 grams. Although the high end is really a low produced item. There is also, as far as packaging goes, we see that as a second product. Our first goal is to make a really good joint and then feed that into a new piece of equipment that we come out on the same business model that is joint packaging.
Hey, Grant, I would just supplement your answer with 2 things. One is when you make different size joints, we've designed the machine to be very modular and easy changeovers. So there's a holder for the joint, which pops out real quickly. And then there's basically a little cap that prevents spillage, which is just a spring pin change out. So if you go to much different size joints, you have to change those 2 elements on the machine. The arms rotate around. You can change over from joint size to another joint size in about 10 minutes. So that's changeover, very easy, very quick. The second, and we touched on a little before, as you change, you then have different techniques for compaction. So most people vibrate from below. We vibrate and we compact. And the reason a lot of our competitors don't just compact is if you're using pneumatics, you don't have the accuracy that you have with electronics. So you can dial up the formula to say how rapidly you want to compact and how deep you want to compact into the joint using our compaction rod. And so you can have a recipe that changes by the type of flour you're using. It can change by the size of cone you have. And so you save those recipes. So when you change over, you say, now I'm on recipe 22, which is this size cone, this kind of flour, this kind of compaction. You run 10, check, say we're good, and then go to town. So it all kind of hinges together to have the flexibility and the quality.
So we have a couple more questions. Do you guys hold any patents?
So we filed for 2 patents. Mike, you may have an update on them, but one of those patents does include the modularity of the piece of equipment itself.
So we have a combination of method and design patents. Method patents being much broader. Our patent application, excuse me. So we filed those, I want to say about a year and a half ago. A year ago, a little bit over a year ago is when we filed them. but our time to invent to when we were is about 1.5 years ago.
And our next question is, what improvements are you making on the machine?
Yeah, so all of our improvements, as we're the owner, we're compensated on output of the equipment. We have an incentive to increase output, to either reduce or defer investment into other pieces of equipment, or to reduce alarms and increase our uptime. So we have sort of two improvements that we'll make prior to the next deliveries, which will be done in the next 2 weeks. One is automatically reloading our paper cones, so the inputs of the machine. The machine moved faster than we anticipated, and so as a result, we took the way we reloaded cones is like a revolver. It was a quick change reload, and we're actually moving to a robotic arm. By doing that, we actually reduced the total cost of the machine. The robotic arm is cheaper than the current apparatus to refill, and it really reduces downtime of the equipment. So it's able to really keep a much more consistent manufacturing time. And then the other small improvement that we're making, I'm currently blanking out, but it will be done in the next 2 weeks. I'm trying to think of what that is. I think it was just a coding change to reduce the downtime in between cycles. So
so Grant, the second change we were making is right now the coding was serial.
Correct.
And so you couldn't start the next step until the first step stopped. And there's some steps you should run in parallel, which takes about 0.5 second off of each joint. And so what we're doing is we're fighting for 0.5 second at a time. So we first looked at the big things. So Grant talked about the cone loader. The cone loader station it holds 250 cones. And so if you're running at 7 seconds a cone, the 250 needs to be changed about twice an hour. And so when we originally came out to change the cones, you'd have to stop the machine and you have to load 25 stacks of 10 into the cone machine, and it took like 30 minutes. So then what we did was short term, we built a speed loader, which you load offline. And then when you run out of cones in the cone holder, you take the speed loader, hold it over it, pull the trigger, and 250 cones drop into the speed loader, shut it, turn the machine back on. That still takes some time. One, we found that the operator's not just sitting there waiting for it to finish. So we put some alarms in place to make sure they know in advance it's coming. So to try and cut that cycle time down. But we also looked at it and said, what we'd really like to do is just make it a continuous process. So that's the robotic arm. You take the box of cones, slide them into the machine without stopping it. The robotic arm picks directly from the box and loads the cone holder, and it will load all 4 station sets if there's 4 station sets. And so that means you don't ever have to stop the machine to replace cones. And so that is a big improvement. On our partner Al loves to talk about the effective rate, which everybody talks about the theoretical rate of how fast you can go. We look at the effective rate as how fast did you go after all the alarms, stops, starts, etc. And we actually include the time to clean the machine at the end of the day, because some of these machines are very complex and hard to clean. We built ours so they can be cleaned quickly. So.
Great. We have a question from Ben asking, can you work with other crops, not just hemp?
Certainly can. I mean, we've run different types of herbs. There's some herbal cigarettes that are out on the market, and because we're not a licensed holder in the state of Maryland, we do a lot of our testing on different blends of herbs and spices, hemp, to simulate the way that cannabis operates in the machine. So certainly can. I think there's an opportunity in the cannabis hemp market at large, but we don't currently use other things. Then I see the next question about maintenance. We budget about 6.25% of our revenue into maintenance, and we do it on a per unit basis. So as people in our model really ramp up production, we also ramp up what amount we set aside for maintenance for the given year. So that's budgeted roughly at 6.5% or 6.25% of revenue at the moment. And over time, our goal is to continue to reduce that as our business model is production as a service, and we maintain and own the machine. There's a very detailed list of cleaning for the operator of this part gets cleaned this often and then gets lubricated. This part gets cleaned with isopropyl alcohol and then let dry before your next run. And, following that list leads to, really high continued use.
So I'd Grant, kind of toss in an example of how we look at things. We have a cone load fill station that twists back and forth, and the motor was on the station. So the wire that hooks up the motor and powers it, the wire kept flexing. And we identified that as a potential point of wear. So one of the changes we made in the machine was to move that motor off of, so the motor no longer rotates, therefore the wire no longer rotates, and that which reduces the point of wear. The second is we went to EtherCAT to reduce the amount of wiring in the machine. So we are continually looking for weak points and upgrading the machine from that standpoint. And then I saw in one of the questions they asked, can you do other things besides hemp? We should point out, we're really focused on cannabis, okay? But we also, as Grant said, when we test the machines, we test using hemp, and then we sell those hemp joints to parties provide us the hemp, and then we basically charge them a fee to give them back joints.
So I have a question. I live in New York, so you know where this is coming from. So we just became legal, so to speak. So how long after a state becomes legal do you find that producers are coming to you, that they discover their labor costs are so high that they can't handle them and they really need you? When do you reach out to them? When a state goes legal, but what's the time frame?
So, Grant?
Back.
So Wendy, I think I look at it two ways. It's recreational is legal in New York, but I believe before recreational in most states, it's preceded by medical is legal. And so we generally get calls from the guys doing medical first, because they said we can't keep up with the medical side of it. And then there's just a tsunami of recreational follows on. So I don't think it's, hey, recreational became legal and then we start getting calls. We've gotten calls before recreational has become legal.
Yeah.
And so.
Fantastic. We're having a question from the audience from David. He wants to know, in what states are cannabis companies using your machine?
So right now, we started delivering about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and we are in the largest operator in Maryland. He's also our best salesman. So he has bought in the past 2 other pieces of equipment. Neither one of them worked. And he spent about $400,000 to $500,000 on 2 other pieces of pre-roll equipment. And he also used to say, I hate your business model. And I said, I understand, but you're a friend of mine. Will you please take a machine? So he said, fine, I'll take a machine. Well, now it's the only machine he uses. He loves our business model, and he is now taking our new potential customers on tours. So we have a schedule to deliver a machine in the next few weeks to California. And then following that, we have a series of orders to fulfill in Massachusetts as well. And so we'll be delivering, we'll be delivering the next few machines over the, I'd say, next 4 to 6 weeks. And that'll give us a total of 5 group sets in the market. And then, what we're looking for capital is to fulfill the new orders that are coming in.
I should point out, Grant, that one of the things, because I'm the guy that held everybody back, I believe the worst thing you can do is open up the floodgates and take tons of orders and then not be able to deliver. So I've held Grant and Al back from taking all the requests for orders in. So we have a lot of pent up demand. We just haven't filled the order book because we want to get the money in and get going and make sure we can keep up with the order backlog. So.
We have another question. Have you done an estimated cost benefit analysis for customers if they produce 300K joints per year?
We have a pretty detailed model that you can put inputs in and it'll drive out. For the operator, it still makes a lot of sense to do automation with us, even though the cost per joint will be higher than the 15 cents, for example, because there's the take or pay minimum. So from our side as a customer, it works very well for our customers because they're able to automate, gain consistency. They don't have to deal with turnover. And then but for us, the charge is a little bit higher because we need to maintain a payback that makes sense.
But I think, Grant, in the question was for 300,000 a year, that's 25,000 joints a month. Our
Correct.
contract is a 50,000 take or pay. So
Correct.
in the end, you're going to be paying roughly double what everybody else pays. So
But
I
it's
think
still
that's,
savings.
and so you then have to look at it as an operator to say, do I get at, we're really walking down then from 15 cents down to, but your 15 cents, you're now paying at 50,000. So you're paying 15 cents, but when you're done, you're really running at 16 cents a joint. So you should, in your head as an operator, you should think of it as I'm really never going to get to the 8 cents if I'm at 300,000 joints per year. So at 15 cents, the cost benefit depends on what it's costing you to actually roll. And, you know, we've seen ranges as we talk to individuals of between, some people think it costs them 3 cents, which they always wind up being wrong because they never take into account everything. And then we have the best guy we've seen is about 15 cents. And the worst guy we've seen is about 90 cents. And what drives that is how fast your team can go and really how much turnover you have in your workforce. Because everybody forgets that, you know, if I have somebody and I'm turning them over every 3 weeks, then I have, you know, 3 days of training, hiring, I'm spending money hiring people, I'm bringing them in, I'm interviewing them, I'm getting them certified, and then I'm getting them up the curve and then they quit on me. And so it's very difficult to maintain that cost per joint if you're a small guy like that.
Yeah, and I would say that most of the time on the low end, what we find, and last week I did a tour of a multi-state operator, they skip an entire step. So they fill it and twist it, but they don't weigh anything in the middle. And as a result, their waste is, you know, on average 20%. Well, if on average your waste is 20%, instead of, you know, one, your labor rate isn't really true because you're sort of skipping a step, but the other side of it is, you know, just from the waste reduction alone, you know, our scales are very, very fine weighing devices that just from reducing that waste, it pays for itself very quickly. So I think that that's, you know, most operators, I would say, you know, I ran lean improvement systems and ran 125 people in Florida, making 250,000 joints a month. And my rate with an assisted weighing device wasn't my favorite piece of technology, but it assisted nonetheless, was about 42 cents. And at that point, I had to focus on other bigger problems in my business to maintain sales. So there's probably some additional cost savings I could have there. But as by and large, I would agree with what Mike said, is that when you start getting into turnover, really looking at the process that you follow, that's where our savings really becomes really expansive, and everybody ends up in the money from the beginning.
So obviously, if you're a small guy like Grant was bigger, running at 42 cents. If you're running in the 40 cents and we're charging you 15, you get an automatic cost savings. Okay. A, B, you get a better quality product and more consistent product. So that's, I think, the second part of the assessment. And the third piece is, even if you are weighing, many of the weigh steps, and we found this in our beta, is they were weighing the cannabis. They would tear a cone and then assume all the cones were the same weight. There is a significant variation in the weight of cones from the lightest cone to the heaviest cone. And they assumed all the cones were the same weight. And they kept telling us our weights were wrong. And then we finally said, okay, we're just going to weigh 200 cones. And we built them a graph that says, here's how the variation in cone weights are. You keep thinking you put the same amount of cannabis in, you're really not. And so they were in the medical side, and they basically were prescribing, here's how much cannabis is in. So they were selling by weight in there, and they were off on their weights and measures. So our machine actually would have helped them. They were just too small to make it make sense for them.
So both Grant and Michael, if you could notice the chat, someone would like you to call them. And from Patrick, we have approximately how many manufacturers, producers make over 1 million joints per year?
Good question. I think getting to that granularity is a little difficult. I'll tell you that there's between 16 and 20,000 operators in the plant touching space that we would be able to call customers, either for fully vertically integrated product manufacturers or just cultivators. And it depends a little bit on market size. So, in California, there's probably, somewhere between 5 and 10% that make more than 1 million a month. I think from a more than 1 million joints a year, we believe right now the market size is somewhere around 7 to 10 billion joints per year. And that market size continues to grow. So there's a lot of operators above 1 million joints per year. Most operators, for example, in Maryland are all, if you're, there's 25 operators in Maryland, I'd say, 18 to 20 of them have the ability to be above 1 million a year. Often the restriction is labor, not having raw material from a plant material perspective. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think that there's probably several thousand throughout the country who can make 1 million a year.
Great. And one thing I just wanted to talk to you about, Grant, is can you just describe your team? Because I found your team fascinating. Their experience is amazing. So maybe you wanted to touch on that?
Sure. So, Allman, I'll sort of start with some of our other team and then round to the people here who are on our, myself and Mike on the panel. So Allman is a technologist by background. He took really one of the early SaaS companies public. They were really network as a service, which is a little bit ahead of its time in 2001. And he's responsible for us for really building our backend infrastructure. So, how does our IoT work? How do we communicate with the machines, the billing, and so on? Jake Dooley is, I would say, our backend operations in terms of how we operate internally, and then really driving through product in terms of how do we interact with the customer, in terms of how do we rank where our improvements fall. We have 2 different engineers on the team who lead engineering. One is Matt Kelly, who's done about $150 million of custom automation, and from a range of Coca-Cola to McCormick. And then Bob Archer brings to us both him and as well as he has another company called Missouri Tooling and Automation. So we have the ability to tap into about 10 to 20 engineers without having them on our payroll in order to accomplish whatever our current engineering feat is that we're looking for. So by having him involved, he's done over $400 million of custom automation, ranging from fully automated pharmacies to all of HP Inc.'s refilling, HP Biosciences for right now things like like on-demand testing. So really a wide range of things like munitions filling is an interesting one as well. And then coming to me is I came from the herbs and spices industry where we did a lot of blending and dry herbs and spices. And then moving from there is I really have had to do every job in the cannabis industry with the extra focus on lean processing. So I started in lean in the herbs and spices business, brought that into cannabis. I've been a part of teams raising about $35 million in cannabis, got those companies up and running. I gave my background a little bit before in terms of running Florida's second largest manufacturing from 3 to 15 million a month without growing headcount. And so with that, I'll turn it to Mike for his abbreviated background, but he also brings quite a depth of experience to our team.
So I'm going to stress, Grant stressed abbreviated. So I worked for GE for about 15 years, all over the world in a variety of functions. Across almost all their businesses. as well as G Capital. Then I was the CFO of Aetna's property casualty business for a little bit over a year. I went to spin that off and bid on it with KKR, and we lost the bid to Sandy Weil. And then I took a payout there and started my own firm for the next 15 years. And we did M&A, restructuring, private equity, and consulting. So I started a fund in India. It's on its 5th fund now. We did, as I said, private equity. So we bought a company. It had about $750 million of revenue on it and sold it to Blackstone right before the crisis. And we actually doubled EBITDA on flat sales. We did M&A. We did about $1 billion of M&A work a year. And we did restructuring. So things like you may have heard of Windstar, Enron, those types of companies where we did restructuring. So a lot of business touch there. When we sold our last company to Blackstone, my partners kind of wanted to retire and move to Florida. I was 48. I wanted to keep working. So I went to run the operations team at THL and became a partner there. And I ran that for the next decade. And then for about the last 3 years, I've been doing things like this, plus investing in other companies that I own.
So one of the things I wanted to ask both of you, I know your ask is $1 million. What increments will you take that in? If somebody wanted to invest 50 or 100, what increments are you accepting that $1 million in? Obviously, everybody would like to get it from one investor, but what increments will you take it in?
Sure. We looked at it as $50,000 would be, the minimum. We wanted to make sure that we had a good investor base, going into Series A and really diversify our cap table. So we wanted to make sure we had the ability for people to come in at 50. And of course, if someone wanted to come in and take the whole round, we'd entertain that as well.
Okay, fabulous. Anybody else who has a question, now would be the time to ask, because we're going to close out shortly. I think this has been amazing. I'm very interested in it. And I have some friends who are going to be very interested in it. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the group before we, Patrick said thank you for your time, but is there anything else you'd like to share with the group before we wrap it up?
I guess I make the assumption you have our contact information. So if somebody wants to get a hold of us, they can.
Correct. Arthur is going to go ahead and send out email to everyone so that they'll be able to contact you. They'll have your information.
I guess I'm going to take my 2 minutes because I think Grant did a great job on the presentation. But
go ahead. By all means,
I think we have four things. One, the modularity of our machine lets us walk into an industry that they're not all giant players. So it lets us walk into it, which allows us to tap almost everybody in the industry. So that modularity and the ability to add on those group sets is really important. Two, the precision of our machine of going to electronics, electric motors versus pneumatics is very important from a quality and compaction, which is critical in this space. And we find our customers really focus on that. What does that pre-roll feel like? Third is the ease of maintenance, which you could say other guys are going to say our machines are easy to maintain. So I kind of put that as a little just self note, but we think we're pretty easy to change things out and maintain. And the last is our financial model is very attractive to this industry. So you put all those four things together and you look at our competitor set, and we have a very good call to action for our consumers. And then the last piece is 8 cents a joint on a product that when you finish it makes $2.50 is a very small amount, especially if it's costing you 40 cents to make it today. So we remove that constraint of growth, we save you money at the same time, and we improve your quality. So End of sales pitch.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think at the end of the day, we have a really attractive business model. And, while someone may look at automation and say, well, it makes sense for us to automate there, oftentimes in cannabis, take a dispensary, for example, costs about $500,000 to open up a dispensary. If you're rewarded on revenue, that's where your investment's going to be made, not into automating in the back of the house. We allow operators to do both. And I think that's really what we're seeing as being powerful as we talk to customers more and more. Now that Mike has led us is, it allows them to put capital to the best use and tackle more than one thing at a time.
That's fantastic, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. And as I said, Arthur will be sending out an email so that everybody will be able to be in contact. I think it's fantastic. And I thank you both for being here this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye now.